Welcome to Conversations. This is Scott Turner, and our guest today is Dr. Bruce Brewer, who is General Manager of the Cheetah Conservation Fund in Otjiwarongo, Namibia. Bruce, welcome to
Thank you very
ESF. Bruce, the Cheetah Conservation Fund is a pretty big operation down there, and of course they're dedicated to conservation of cheetah Conservation Fund. But the thing that's made them a leader in the field is that they have really a very holistic approach to cheetah conservation. So, could you tell us a little bit about the history of the CCF and what the nature of its approach is and what makes it stand out from other cheetah conservation operations?
Okay, Cheetah Conservation Fund, as you say, is aimed at the global conservation of the cheetah. So we work throughout the cheetah's range, which means throughout Africa, from Algeria all the way down to South Africa. We have a satellite we've spun off in Kenya. We've helped people start programs in Botswana and Zimbabwe and South Africa. We're currently consulting with people in Zambia, etc. We've also worked in Iran, where there's a small remnant population of the so-called Asiatic cheetah. And we're currently collaborating with people in Uzbekistan who are trying to bring back the cheetah after decades of absence. We're also involved in a current initiative which may result in the return of cheetahs to India for the first time since perhaps 1950. We are in Namibia because Namibia is the heartland of the global population. There are perhaps 10,000 cheetahs left worldwide. Of those, 3,500 to 4,000 live in Namibia. Another 1,000 is right next door in Botswana. So indeed, this is the focus of the population. In biologic terms, this will be the refugia if things go bad. So if you want to conserve cheetahs, you have to get your programs right in Namibia, and then you spread them elsewhere. You can think of us as a Namibian NGO that has fundraising arms in America and other countries, or you can think of us as a predominantly American NGO that has a field station in Namibia. There are three arms to our work: research, education, and conservation. In the research end of things, we've handled and mostly re-released over 1,000 cheetah. So we have perhaps the biggest biomedical database on any single endangered species. And the cheetah is an endangered species throughout most of its range. In Namibia, we're fortunate it's only threatened. But as far as most of the world goes, the cheetah is an endangered species. So for these animals we have all sorts of biometric measures. We've had blood sampled from them. We've developed methodology for gamete collection. For all the males, we electroejaculate them, and we have the biggest genome resource bank for cheetah sperm. We've also worked with people. Our main collaborators in reproductive research have been the Smithsonian Institution, and with them, we've developed a blastocyst even of cheetah, trying to develop reproductive techniques that can be used later in the captive populations if necessary.
The blastocyst is an early embryonic stage.
Right. We've gone to, I think, the third cell stage in that. And so the basic research is important, of course, to monitor the health not only of the wild population, but to use to help maintain the global captive populations, and to simply have a reference bank if things go bad in the future. So in addition to research, we have an education arm where we explain the problems of the cheetah, ways to conserve cheetah, the values of the cheetah, etc. And each year at our Research and Education Center in Namibia, we host perhaps 2,000 students. But additionally, our educators go outside to the school system and interact with perhaps another 20,000 students each year. Those are we also create visual aids and printed material that teachers can use or naturalists can use in their own programs to tell people more about the cheetah. The conservation activities, of course, include educating politicians, etc., the value of keeping wildlife around, in particular the cheetah. It includes educating farmers, and it means working with the farmers a lot. In Namibia, a rancher is called a farmer. And most of the ranches or farms, that we would call them in Namibia, have a mixture of cattle and small stock, so-called goats and sheep, the smaller livestock that are kept. And these animals occur in conjunction with the native wildlife, the antelopes, the kudu, the oryx, the springbok, etc. And so the predators also move through these farmlands. And so we're trying to educate the farmers in a way they can live sustainably and farm sustainably with wildlife. A lot of this is just teaching basic farm methodology, like corral your livestock at night, have a common calving season so it all happens at once so you can watch it better, things like that. But also we have a program where we help them protect their livestock. We raise and give to the farmers a particular breed of livestock guarding dog, in our case Anatolian Shepherds and Kangals, which are Turkish breeds. And we place those out with the farmers, and they help ward off any attempts by the predators to come take off their stock.
Okay, so you know, that's very focused on not only the conservation of the cheetah itself and clearly, you know, building societal awareness of the issues is awfully important. But you know, I've known you and Laurie for many years now, and one of the things that has struck me about the approach of the Cheetah Conservation Fund is that not only are you focused on conserving cheetah and all the societal aspects that are important in that, but you're also considering the cheetah as embedded in a larger, not only social but biological ecosystem. And can you tell us a little bit about that aspect of the approach to cheetah conservation?
Well, conservation isn't simple, as you know. You can't just focus on your species of interest nowadays. So we're very involved with everything that relates to the health of the habitat in Namibia. So it's, you know, how are the antelope doing? Are there particular disease problems? Are there issues with hunting offtake? Are there issues with illegal offtake? What's society's interest in reserve lands? How's legislation going to keep that going? And in Namibia, we have a particular problem I think we'll talk about later, about bush encroachment, where we've got an alteration of the habitat where it's a native woodland savanna, but due to man's intervention, the woodland component, the woody components, overshadowing the grass component, which has a real negative impact on the economics of the farming community, so we're trying to address that also.
So we're going to be talking about that aspect of it in more detail a little bit later, because I know that Laurie Marker, you know, she's really the cheetah lady, but you're involved in some interesting aspects of the larger ecosystem questions as well. And we'll be back in a moment. We're speaking with Bruce Brewer, and we'll have more conversations in a moment. Welcome back to Conversations. We're here with Bruce Brewer, General Manager of the Cheetah Conservation Fund in Namibia. Bruce, we were speaking earlier about cheetahs being embedded in ecosystems, and one of the big problems that faces cheetah down there is not so much a problem with an invasive species or something else coming out there, but actually a native species. It's an actual ecological problem. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, second only to the problems of dealing with man, which you may or may not look at as a native species in the area. The major problem is an overgrowth of the native thorn bush.
That's Acacia mellifera, right?
And related species,
Okay.
related thorny bushes. Now, there are many different species of acacia, and
Okay.
it depends where you are in the country, which one you have a problem with. Namibia is a fairly large country, 82 million hectares, but I think you know that Namibia has a big stony desert, we'd call it, along the coast. In fact, the world's most ancient desert, the Namib. That takes up a fair chunk of the country. Of the remaining hectares, 26 million have a problem with what is called bush encroachment. The habitat is a mixed woodland savanna, which means a mixture of these woody bushes and grasses.
And of course, the animals like to graze on the grass. It needs to be open for them to get to it.
Yes, but some like to browse, so there has to be some browse too. So the native situation is a balance of woodland and grass, and of course, there is no one best balance, but a good historic guess is it was predominantly grass. Well, due to the intervention of man, through removal of the native browsers, the big native browsers, the rhinos and the elephants, which the ranchers won't tolerate because they break fences, so they've extirpated them. Due to overstocking their livestock, which have grazed the grass excessively and or pounded down the land with too many hoofbeats per square meter, whatever. And due to fire suppression, because the farmers don't like fires potentially getting out of hand and hurting their fences and taking off their grass, which their cattle needs to graze on. Due to these three factors, with the addition of our fluctuating environment, which has periodic droughts, the balance in this woodland savanna has changed to where it's now predominantly bush. 26 million hectares of Namibia, that's almost a third of this country of 82 million hectares. 26 million hectares of bush of land are classified as bush encroached by the government.
I think it's important to actually give people a sense of what bush encroachment looks like. You know, these thorny bushes, they are almost a conical species that emerges from a single rootstock. And when you have bush encroachment, you have this tangle of very nasty thorns that make it impossible or very difficult for any animal to get through.
It's like trying to walk through an evergreen hedge or something.
Yeah.
You might see lining any street anywhere. Imagine trying to walk through that, or in this case, though, the bushes can be several meters tall. And so it just becomes almost impenetrable. And this, of course, alters the distribution of the remaining browsers and grazers somewhat. It can even cause a problem for a cheetah or other animal that needs a bit of an open area to run through. They don't have enough open area to hunt well, so they have problems. They can scar themselves with thorns, etc. Of the 26 million, 10 million are severe, what are labeled as severely infested. And there, the stocking rate for a farmer is reduced in half. So he or she can only keep half as many livestock as he or she might have kept several decades ago. So the farming economics are very depressed. Given that there seems to be a relationship between a farmer's economic well-being and their tolerance for a little bit of a loss to predators, we're trying to come up with programs that will allow them some more income by trying to put a value on this unwanted biomass so that an industry will develop that will thin it somewhat. And our first product's been...
And the industry is this right here. This is a product known as Bushblock, and it to me is a very innovative way of actually solving a whole lot of problems, which include not only the immediate problem of bush encroachment, but also you mentioned one economic value, but there's also other broader social benefits as well. So your solution, which I think is an imaginative one, is Bushblock. Tell us how you came up with it and what it does.
Right. It's also aimed at job creation. There's a huge problem with unemployment in Namibia. The government even recently admitted to 50% unemployment. They now realize that might be an error. Perhaps may only be 40%, but it's massive. Unemployment. This creates jobs at the low level. It opens up the bushland so that the stocking rate can increase. More importantly, it provides a source of fuel, and we're trying to convince people that they can utilize this unwanted biomass to, do something positive and address other problems. So this is seen as simply our first initiative. We're hoping other people take the idea and run with it in doing perhaps wood pellet factories, or even more importantly, making biomass power in country.
So how do you make Bushblock? Tell us how you do that.
Very simple. In our case, you harvest the bush, and we actually do this with an FSC. I don't know if you see the label on there, but we do ours even approved by the Forest Stewardship Council. So we do what's called a thinning harvest. We're not trying to clear cut. We don't take everything. We leave bushes of different age classes behind. We tell our guys they can never take a tree more mature than they can get their hands around. So in our case, we harvest it manually, generally, and we're looking at mechanical assisted means. That's a whole separate issue. It's a methodology of harvest. We let it lay for perhaps a month, so the leaves and fine needles and branches or twigs some will fall off to re-nourish the ground. And then we come along and chip it with a chipper, just like you'd have in a tree service here in any major city. We do that just to reduce it in particle size to make it easier to transport. We transport it to a small factory we have in the town of Oshawarongo, about 45 kilometers from our research and education center. There we hammer mill it to a small particle size, about 4 millimeters, something like an oat seed perhaps. That's the raw material that's dumped into an extrusion press. The press is simply a giant worm gear pushing this milled biomass through a die with a very slight taper to it with some extra heat added. No additives at all. The heat and the pressure being forced through cause the cellulose components to reform chemically and bind together. It creates a continuous log stream, and then we just have a saw that just keeps chopping the log stream as it comes up.
And you package
Totally
it and
pure
sell it.
product.
Yeah. Now if you look at the amount of energy you can get from burning wood, I was looking this up earlier. It's about 10 megajoules per kilogram. But you were telling me that you actually get almost twice that energy density, almost 18 megajoules.
Because
per
this is a
kilogram.
densified product.
Right.
This thing is harder than hardwood, just due to the manufacturing process.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's harder, it's denser than a stick of raw hardwood.
Yeah. We're going to explore the energy implications of Bushblock when we come back, but join us in a few minutes for more conversations. Welcome back to Conversations. We're here speaking with Bruce Brewer of the Cheetah Conservation Fund in Namibia. And in the previous segment, we were talking about the incredible increase of energy density that you get from these things. And when you combine this with the number of hectares and the density of bush on the veldt in Namibia, you come up with some quite staggering figures for just how much energy is there to ready for harvest. And tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling, as one would say. With our just working on our 10 million hectares of bush of land that are severely bush encroached, and doing only a thinning harvest like we do that still qualifies for FSC accreditation, you get at least 10 tons of usable woody biomass per hectare. So 10 tons, 10 million hectares. Namibia is sitting on 100 million tons of unwanted woody biomass. The entire global trade in wood fuel pellets at the moment, as we speak in 2012, is I think around 16 million tons or something, projected to go up to perhaps 20 in a couple years or so. But you can see we're sitting on a massive resource that
That's the Saudi Arabia of biomass almost, right?
Perhaps, yes, and we'd like to see it utilized in a holistic manner. I mean, there's room for wood fuel briquettes, which we do, which is a small niche market, one might say. There's room for wood fuel pellets, which are the major form in global trade to power electricity plants, generally up in Scandinavia and UK. And there's room for making chemicals from the bush. You can get very many useful chemicals by distilling the bush. And there's room for making power locally. Namibia has a power shortage. Namibia is a tiny user. The whole country uses less than a gigawatt, but the whole country can only manufacture less than 500 kilowatts.
Yeah, it's a little over 2 million people who use
500
this.
megawatts, excuse me.
And not all of them are very heavy electricity users,
Right.
Yeah.
We do have problems, though, that the need is increasing due principally to the mining industry developing more mines. And we're not as able as we used to be to bring power in, which they call wheeling, to wheel power in from the neighbors, because the neighbors have power problems of their own. So we have a shortage of electricity, we have an excess of biomass. It seems to cry out that we should start using some of that to generate our own electricity.
Yeah, and so the market is there, the need is there, is there any obstacle that you can think of that's standing in the way of this taking off like it should?
Harvest is an issue because the majority of the lands are privately owned. And historically, to harvest bush, you had to bring a gang of people on the land to harvest your biomass. There are a couple different stages actually to capturing the biomass. There's harvest, which is felling it, and then you have to somehow move it. And to move it, the best way is you reduce it further in size, you chip it so it packs better and you can move it away. Chipping is a fairly rapid process and involves trucks and chippers, so generally you have gangs that can come in and out of a town or whatever to do this. Harvest, if you do it manually with axe and panga, is a very slow process, and so generally you would have a team of harvesters on your farm for a long period of time. There are associated socioeconomic problems with that, of course. The harvesters can run a dirty field camp. They may decide that they need to poach to augment their diet. You know, they may leave trash behind that hurts your farm machinery or your cow swallows later and blah, blah, blah. So the farmers have been reluctant to allow harvest teams onto their land. There's another approach that is very rapid harvest all in one, which involves bringing on a large machine, much like a grain combine. And we have some of these in Namibia now working for a cement factory. And they have big 2-meter heads on them, unshielded hammer mills, and they can go through and chop the bush and blow it into a container and back.
But that's not going to get the forest, the FSC certification, right? So it's kind of a bad solution.
They haven't tried, and in fairness, I don't know. It's not as maneuverable as we would like. In a forestry standpoint, they approach the problems of biodiversity by leaving islands behind untouched. They totally don't touch because they can't leave enough behind as they maneuver these big rigs around. But even maneuvering them like that, obviously you can't avoid the chameleons and frogs and native rodents, etc., that are down below as you're hammer milling your way around. So we're trying to come up with smaller machinery to do this. It turns out it's a fairly hot issue in the forest industry. This is very similar to what the major forest industry calls slash handling, which is using the tops of the trees and the branches that they finally realized have, you know, value as power generation, etc. But the forest industry generally admits that they don't have the right size machine to do this yet. So we're still investigating machinery and talking to people about ways to slightly mechanize the harvest so we're more productive there. And then we can go ahead and simply hire more people in the chipping and transporting end of the chain. So you still have a lot of job creation, but you're not going to be on the farmer's land for as long, so he or she is more likely to let you come and work and take away their unwanted biomass.
So what you're describing then is an industry with tremendous potential, but where you need an increasing development of expertise, not only in harvest methods, but also utilization, imaginative utilization of the product, all the way up to sociological things, providing jobs, providing economic security for people, and this leads us up to why you're here visiting us. We've just signed an agreement with the Cheetah Conservation Fund, and this includes Ben Gurion University in Israel as a joint venture to develop education and research programs with the Cheetah Conservation Fund. So how can ESF help you, Bruce, to realize this potential?
We have a research campus sitting on 100,000 acres of Namibian woodland savanna. And we would love to have more students come in, and particularly more advising faculty come along with them and help us address some of these problems. In particular, ESF fits right in due to your long-term work in the area. You're very familiar with the systems there. Ben Gurion is familiar with arid land ecology and such systems. ESF itself seems to have some expertise in biomass processing. So, I mean, it seems like a very logical fit, and we'd very much like to become thought of as sort of a field station for ESF for ecological studies and biomass.
Well, the ESF campus in Africa has great potential. Bruce, thank you so much for visiting us today, and we look forward to developing this program in the future. For Conversations, this is Scott Turner wishing you a good day.